Hi, my name is Aral Balkan and I'm a cyborg rights activist. What that means is that I work to protect human rights in the digital and networked age. The problem with technology is who owns and controls it. So if we as individuals own and control our own technology and the data that's gathered with that and the insight that gives us about our lives, then there's no problem here. That's a system that's compatible with democracy, it's compatible with human rights. The problem is that our technologies today are owned and controlled by a handful of corporations, and that gives them a huge amount of power and insight over us, and that is not compatible with democracy. That's a corporatocracy. We're talking about Facebook, we're talking about Google, yes. So these huge Silicon Valley companies that track everything that we do on the internet and off of the internet. So Google can track you all the way to a store when you use your credit card now and tie that to all the other information they have about you. So these companies, as their business model, track us and profile us, and then they use that intimate insight to affect and manipulate our behavior. And that is not compatible with a society in which people are informed about the organizations around them and can take part in a democratic process. Well, we should definitely be worried as ordinary citizens because this affects us every day. What does it mean when corporations know everything about you and you don't know anything about them? How can they manipulate our behavior? Because remember, they have one goal: to, on quarter, provide profit growth. That's their only goal if you're a multinational corporation, if you're a publicly traded corporation. So what does that mean? They have all of this information about us, and they use it to manipulate our behavior to satisfy their goals. Why shouldn't you be worried? You have every reason to be worried about this. There are things you can do. You can start to understand the difference, for example, between Apple, which is again a $1 trillion company, but has a different business model. They sell you a phone. When Apple sells you an iPhone for a lot of money and you buy it, they're happy at that point. If you throw that iPhone into the bin and you never use it, Tim Cook is still happy. He made his profit. If you buy an Android phone and you throw it in the bin, Google is not happy because they haven't made any money. It's only when you turn it on so they can start watching you, they can start profiling you, they can start manipulating your behavior. That's when they start making the money. So night and day difference in business model between two basically $1 trillion companies. But Apple has a competitive advantage in privacy. So you can make a decision there. You can say, okay, my next phone is going to be an Apple phone, not an Android phone, because of this. Is Apple a long-term solution? No. It's proprietary, it's closed, it's still yet another American company that, could go any way. The next Tim Cook may not be a nice guy, maybe the current one is, but we need solutions where we don't have to rely on benevolent kings. Today we've created a world where the main business model of technology is what I call people farming. These companies are factory farms for human beings. So this is what we're calling progress today. So maybe the question is not so much would we have had the same amount of progress if we didn't have venture capital, but what would the character of that progress have been? Would that have been different? Would it have been a fairer, kinder type of progress? Progress is not just a vector from the past to the future. It's the character of the technologies that determine the character of that progress. So could we have had a fairer, kinder progress? Yes. Surveillance capitalism is basically the interplay between surveillance and capitalism. So capitalism is about the accrual of wealth. It's about gathering wealth. What happens when the people and organizations that have gathered that wealth then invest it in surveillance machinery, in surveillance devices, which give them insight into the lives of every one of us, which means they can manipulate our behavior, which leads to even more wealth for them. So it's this feedback loop between surveillance and capitalism, the accrual of wealth and the accrual of information, that creates this chasm of inequality in power. We've been living in a digital world for quite a long time now, and there was a time when we didn't have surveillance capitalism. In the 80s, we had personal computers, but these were just tools for you. When you were using a personal computer, a corporation somewhere wasn't watching everything you were doing and noting it down and then trying to analyze your behavior and find out who you are and manipulate you. If you installed an app, like on a disk, a floppy disk in the 80s, and it did these things, maybe it rang home to a corporation, then we called it malware. We knew that it was spyware, it was bad. Today, it's the business model of Silicon Valley. So what's changed is we live in a digital and networked world. And the technologies we've created in that networked part are centralized. So these centralized corporations are learning everything about us. We can do that differently. We can build peer-to-peer systems where we own the data, we own the technology, we own the algorithms. And that changes it completely. The power structures, that's a much more egalitarian power structure. There are a number of solutions and things that we could be doing better. So first of all, we could be supporting those companies that don't spy on you, that don't use surveillance. There are those companies that still just make a product. So in the US, for example, there's Basecamp, which is a project management software online. But they make their money by people subscribing to their service. So support those. Support independent businesses, small businesses that aren't based on this model. Not every new company is a startup. If you're not a startup, don't call yourself a startup because you're just perpetuating that Silicon Valley brand. And then beyond that, let's support free and open source tools that are not based on surveillance because they don't require us to trust them. They don't require us to put our trust into them. And then beyond that, we can look at, well, supporting maybe federated or decentralized tools like Mastodon. Mastodon is a decentralized Twitter. So, and it's very easy to use, so why don't we use it? Get on there. Not everyone has to be on it. Maybe you want to share, I don't know, things with your local community. Get your community on there. So these tools and our success criteria for them are different. We won't have the alternatives be, our alternatives won't grow in the same way because they don't have the same success criteria. And that's important to understand. The alternatives will grow organically. They won't grow exponentially. A bureaucracy is simply a social system which at its heart has individuals, has people whose integrities are intact. We have this in the biological sense, right? We protect the integrity of the self, of the person, of our biological bodies. We have human rights law that protects this, or it should. What we don't have is the same thing in the digital and networked world, in a digital and networked age. That's all bureaucracy means. It's having that basic structure, the person, safeguarded so that we have the atoms for a community. We have the atoms of a commons. Well, so when we talk about personhood in the digital networked age, we're not talking about something that exists just within your biological borders. We're talking about a sharded concept. So it's, yes, of course, your being is held within your biological body, but also on your phone to some degree. You're putting your thoughts in there, right? We can start analyzing that. That's becoming part of you at this point. So personhood has to, our understanding of personhood has to transcend the boundaries, the biological boundaries of our person so that we can protect it within human rights law. So can the power of Google and Facebook be challenged? Yes. Can it be limited? Yes. That's where regulation is very important. It's very difficult for us to regulate because we're institutionally corrupt. The institutions that should be regulating these companies are being lobbied by these companies. So these companies spend millions of dollars and euros to lobby the people in the European Commission, etc., which should be protecting us from them. So we need to really tackle institutional corruption. But beyond that, it's regulation that limits their abuses. So we can limit their abuses. Are we going to kill them off or destroy them? I don't think so, not really. I mean, look at IBM. IBM actually literally worked with Hitler, during the Holocaust, and they're still here. So, we don't kill these big companies. They stay around. And we probably won't kill off Google and Facebook. But will we have alternatives? That's the key question here. A world without the alternatives is a very different one to a world with the alternatives. I think that trying to build a replacement for Google or Facebook is the wrong way of trying to solve this problem, because the only thing that will replace a Facebook is another Facebook. The only thing that will replace Google is another Google. We need to be building tools differently with different success criteria. We don't want a European Google. That's just going to be another Google. We don't want a Google that's a nationalized Google. That's going to be another Google that the government controls. Let's build technology so that it's owned and controlled by individuals, and that will be a completely different topology then. It will be a decentralized topology, and that will create a completely different type of society as well. Our societies are all hierarchical today, and that's part of the problem. Our political parties are hierarchical today. If we want a different type of society, then we need to create the infrastructure that supports a different type of topology, a decentralized peer-to-peer topology.